Dr. Rick Timbs standing by right now from the New York State, the Statewide School Finance Consortium. And we're looking at just about a month before we'll be heading back to school, or will we? Dr. Timbs, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. So what do we? I know we're waiting on the governor, but a lot of schools are required by the end of the month to provide a plan moving forward, and a lot of schools. I know in one case, Central Square is planning to do a hybrid for elementary students, but for middle and high school students, it'll be 100% distant learning.
Yeah, well, that sometimes happens. Remember, each school district has to write their own plan, and they're supposed to engage some of the public to get some feedback on what they think they ought to do. But it's going to be very, very difficult to actually have all the students arrive at school in any fashion for any period of time.
And what are the other part of this is that you need masks, you need disinfectants, you need all of these things. That stuff all costs money. And here we are looking at what could be a real cut in the school's state aid.
Yeah, we've got a couple things going on. First of all, just requiring the sanitizing of the buses, the sanitizing of the classrooms, additional sanitizing, the purchasing of masks and PPE. For instance, if they believe a child may be infected, nurse has to be wearing full PPE. So all these types of things have to occur. So this is going to be a very expensive proposition. Plus, from the state aid perspective, these students must be in attendance, must be getting regular instruction. So what actually has to happen here is attendance has to be taken for these students, whether it's remote learning or whether they're actually on site, because your state aid depends upon it, because your average daily attendance, in many ways, parts of the state aid formula.
Obviously, your daughter is a teacher who is my wife, and she will not be alone in all of this. This is going to be major change, and will not be easy for teachers to accomplish all this.
Well, that's right. What you've got to do is the first roadblock you've got to this whole thing is trying to get the kids to school.
Right.
So many of us have 67 passenger school buses. And the reason we have this, so we can pick up a large volume of kids in the morning and in the afternoon, take them home all at once, okay? And so what happens here is that with social distancing on a bus, and kids are required to wear masks on a bus, the driver's required to wear a mask, and the bus must be disinfected before they get there. Actually, the health guidelines and SED guidelines, the Education Department guidelines, ask the parents check their kids to make sure they're healthy before they send them. But the school must have the capacity to also check them, like their temperature and so on, when they arrive. So the other problem is, in 67-passenger bus, you might only be able to get, depending upon the configuration of the bus for, wheelchair-bound kids and so on, you might be only be able to get 6 to 12 kids on the bus.
Right.
So it's going to be multiple routes. So right off the bat, for safety purposes, obviously, multiple routes, and back and forth. And so what you've got here is a cash register ringing on the cost of the school district. Mm-hmm. Now, you need fresh masks for the bus driver every day. The bus driver must also have masks for kids who show up at the bus pickup point with no mask, because they can't deny them an education, so they have to provide them with a mask.
Yeah.
The school's got to buy masks for kids who forget their mask. And, of course, we're dealing with, things happen. They forget their books. Sometimes they forget their masks. That's going to be. Then they got to get to school, and you've got to get them 6-foot distance as they walk into school, because they have to be separated from each other. The average school classroom is 770 square feet. So I'm sure somebody's going to get a bright idea, start looking at how many kids you can get in there. Well, Usually it's somewhere between 6 and 12. That's because you have to have room for the door to open. You have to have room for the univentilator, right? There's cupboards in there and all the rest of it, sometimes sinks. So now what's happening is you can't have these full classes of 20, 25 kids in a classroom. You can only maybe have 6 to 12, depending upon how the classroom is laid out. So obviously what you may have to do is even rotate these kids. Some kids may come, say, I'm going to make it up, Monday, Wednesday. Other kids come Tuesday, Thursday. And then teachers have to learn all this remote learning for the rest of the days. So they'll be doing remote learning, we'll say, on Friday. So that's one possibility. So this creates a whole bunch of problems. Teachers have to have a fresh mask every day because the kids come in differently every day.
Right.
Remember that schools are just a hotbed of colds and coughs and all kinds of things, and we are heading into flu season. All right? Then you need custodians and cleaners and principals and everybody else with masks. And they've got to be provided masks, and they have to have disinfectant all the time. So there's going to be all kinds of rules here. Matter of fact, the State Education Department pamphlet on the rules you have to follow is 145 pages long.
Wow. You know, you mentioned the transportation. Oftentimes we it's like an armchair quarterback on Monday morning. But you look at it and you say, well, this doesn't make any sense. Why not let some parents bring their kids to school? And because a lot of them probably already do as is right now anyway. That'll lessen the amount so you can get them. That'll solve the busing problem. But the problem is that we, from our armchair, don't really see is the school has to be prepared in an emergency to put all of those kids on a bus and get them home.
That is correct. That by law, they're required to be able to do that. They have to have enough buses so they could empty the entire building simultaneously.
Yeah.
So the other thing, too, is that I don't know if I know you have, and I have too, but many parents will remember, if you go to pick up your child or drop off your child in the morning, many schools are not equipped for huge numbers of parents to show up in their own cars.
Right.
The traffic jam on some of these streets will be just enormous. And then, of course, bus pickup points. You can't pass a stop school bus, even on school property. So this could create a tremendous amount of chaos if every parent decides to bring their own child.
Okay, and with that said, what about the smaller schools? Should they be treated differently than the larger schools because with less students, it's easier to social distance?
Well, it's not exactly. So I think the thing that you got to keep in mind is that regardless of the population of the school district, usually they have the number of buildings and rooms to commensurate to that population. So smaller schools may have smaller populations, but they actually have smaller buildings. But the classrooms are all the same size. So they're all going to run into the same difficulty. The problem with larger schools, for instance, city school districts and so on, or larger suburban school districts, is the sheer volume of the work, right? Trying to get, we'll say, 200 kids into a building is one issue. Trying to get 500 or 1,000 kids into a building is a different issue.
Dr. Timbs, I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that every teacher in every school has the ability or the capability to distantly teach. I don't know if I'm using that phrase correctly, but basically stand up in front of a live streaming laptop and run a lesson for 30, 45 minutes to an hour. I guess part of my concern is that some teachers just aren't even acquainted with that technology. I'm sure they could over some time do that, but when
we've already seen it in the spring. It was not easy.
I think you're absolutely correct, Jeff. I think the dilemma is that we're all on a learning curve. Most teachers are basically operating the classroom where they can work with kids one-on-one together. It's a social phenomenon as well. And when you move to technology with remote learning, distance learning, however you want to call it, there's this different skill set. And I think what's going to happen is school districts are now trying to gear up to be instructive to help teachers cope with this new, shall we say, teaching style, way of delivery. But also it changes their lesson planning. It changes how they communicate with kids. There's no hands-on, so it makes it much more difficult. I don't know if you've ever been on a Zoom meeting or one of those Google meetings or something like that where you've got, say, 10 or 15 people all on the screen trying to watch all those little dots of faces and find out if they're getting it or not, or making sure that they're interacting and so on is very difficult. So I think you've got a point that it's very difficult, I think, for some faculty to really adapt to that. But schools are obligated to make sure that faculty is further trained during the school year to do a better job at it. Now, from the other point, the dilemma we have some places in rural areas is there's no signal to do the distance learning. In other words, there's no Wi-Fi or there's no drop or something. So, and it's patchy or it's very slow because these programs that run distance learning take up a lot of power in a computer and need a lot of bandwidth, shall we say, in terms of being able to have these things run. So this is where I wish New York State had been on the ball for years and we had more Wi-Fi and all that type of thing all over the place, but we don't. We have definite huge dead spots, huge.
And then there's the issue of daycare. Even if we go to and we're talking about this with the younger students. Even if we go to an A-B type situation where half the kids come 2 days, the other half come another 2 days, we're seeing that being thrown around. But that still places each parent potentially in a situation where they have a daycare issue 3 days out of the week.
That's absolutely correct. Daycare is going to be another nightmare. And I'll tell you why daycare is going to be another nightmare. Because what happens is these kids are supposed to be home being remote learning. Can they get remote learning at daycare? Or is somebody going to be watching them? So we've got the supervision of these children. And the thing is we don't want them to lose anything they've gained in terms of their learning and their capacity and their attributes and so on. But there's other young children at home, perhaps, in many households that aren't ready for school yet, and you've got that issue. Yeah. And what I found in my research, just talking to people that I know that have young children who've actually they're trying to reopen some of these daycares, but all you need is one kid to get sick, and all of a sudden the daycare has got a problem.
Yep.
So this is going to be a societal issue. Everybody's going to have all the oars in the water, and everybody's going to have to row in the same direction to get this thing to work. So this is going to be a test of our ability to cope and be cooperative and kind of keep our cool and try and make the best of a terrible situation.
Yeah. Michael's saying in regards to the buses, these buses most likely will need to be disinfected multiple times a day. Once you empty it, you got to disinfect it, right?
Right. So think of it this way. So I just did a little calculations, for instance, just as an example. For a 1,500 pupil school district, I figure for the school year I will need a minimum of about 75,000 masks.
Mm.
Now, picture this. Somebody said, well, I'm sure you could order 75,000 masks if you tried. Well, not if there's 700 school districts in the state of New York and they all need 75,000 masks.
Yeah.
Remember, we've got 2.6 million kids, or 2.3 maybe, million kids going to school in the state of New York. So this is going to be a real problem. And don't forget, you got to transport these kids still to parochial schools, to private schools, to charter schools. So this is very, very complicated. This is going to be taxing on everybody who works in a school district. And I hope people have patience, because one size does not fit all. This is very complicated. This is very difficult. And safety is the key here, and then learning is the second key. But unless we can get them there from home to school and school to home safely, and while they're in school, they're safe, we have to have protocols in case somebody is sick. We have to have protocols on who gets readmitted after they've been sick. There's just, this is so complicated. This is probably the most complicated things have ever been in schools probably forever.
Yeah,
and it's going to be expensive. We're talking
that was the next
50,
part.
60, $100,000, a couple $100,000.
Yeah. And I was going to say, in addition to the complications you laid out, specifically when it comes to distant learning, I've said this before, it's a terrible situation, but some kids go to school with no notebook, no pen.
Right.
They don't have a laptop at home to consume
that.
I think that's
already
the parent on board.
That's already being addressed.
I think we're starting to conquer that, Jeff. Many schools have just gone out and bought huge numbers of laptops.
Yep.
Just huge numbers. We're actually heading into a society anyway where every kid's going to be walking around with a laptop rather than a textbook.
Yeah.
All right, so we're turning that corner. The big problem is connectivity to the kid at home with the laptop, and then them being able to use this technology as well as the teacher being able to use it.
All right, I want to throw this out. Somebody's saying here, how about the mental effects of the students and the concerns of those 5 pediatricians? If you remember, there were 5 pediatricians that came out and said, hey, these kids have got to go back to school.
There you go. In the guidelines from SED and the Department of Health, they talk about social and emotional learning. And social workers now, school psychologists, the principal, the teacher, everybody's going to have to start working on the physical and social well-being of these children. Take care of the mental health issues, basically, but also the physical issues, because, young kids, they like to run around, they like to have exercise, and so on, but they can't be groups. Kids are social beings right off the bat.
Yep.
I mean, kids can't wait to get back to school, maybe not to meet their favorite teacher, but certainly to see their friends, if nothing else, if you get my drift. So there has to be time set aside for these kids to take care of their social and emotional well-being. Now, this may come in, say, as they deal with their new class, which may be only 6 to 12 kids at a time, or it might be individual kids having specific issues, just as you pointed out. because every household is different.
Yeah.
Every problem is different. And it's a requirement in this reopening plan. It must be taken care of. And that includes, by the way, constant communication with parents in terms of issues and how they can help.
This, he goes on by saying, all we hear is what we can't do. Give me a break. What have these administrators been doing? We just got a survey to take for CVA, and we got it in the mail yesterday. How do you respond to that?
Well, that's because what happens is all this time, I'd say for the last 2 months, at least, maybe more, I know that I've met with a lot of superintendents and talked with a lot of superintendents, and way back, I don't know, I think it was like March and April, we were all talking about how we would open school and so on. But the thing is, you can talk generally, but until the Department of Health issues the specific guidelines you have to meet, until State Education Department issues specific guidelines you have to meet. But in those guidelines, in particular, State Education Department, it requires schools to have an outreach plan to the community before they exercise what they really want to do with their plan. So that's probably why CVA sent something out now to get feedback before they come up with their final plan that's going to be instituted.
And most likely they have, the schools, I think, most schools right now, I think, have a plan A, B, C, D. They have multiple plans. They're just not sure which one they can go with because you're still waiting on the governor, right?
Well, not exactly. In a way, yes. In a way, no.
Okay.
The truth of it is they know which way to go based on all the outlines that have been provided so far. Then they will submit their plan, and then the governor's team will examine the plan against the required outlines to make sure the plan meets all the outlines. That's it.
Yep.
So there's nothing like new guidance coming from the governor per se, unless they find a common error that everybody's making or something like that. Otherwise, all the guidance is out there. But now, the new requirement that just came out last week was they have to interface with members of the community in some fashion. For instance, I have friends that have been contacted, just like this gentleman probably had texted or emailed into you, has been contacted by the school. But the thing is they want to get some parent or, say, citizen feedback before they finalize their plan in case there's something perhaps they didn't think of.
I watched a committee online that was having their second or third meeting about this, and they did come up with 4 or 5 different plans as options, and then each option showed the hurdles that are associated with that. And I have to tell you, every single plan, the one hurdle that I feel like every school is dealing with that is transportation. It's the hardest thing.
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. Well, let me give you an example how difficult this is. As much as everybody's come up with all these plans, just last week, the 145 pages came out. For instance, even just the checklist from the Department of Health is 10 pages long. Just the checklist.
Yeah.
So what has happened is now they're getting all these. In other words, everybody's thought about these things in concept, and now all of a sudden, all these regs come out, all these requirements and specifics. For instance, does a kid actually have to wear a mask all day? So no matter what you've been planning, now there's a rule about that. So if they can't social distance, they got to be wearing a mask. Does a bus driver have to wear a mask when he's driving a bus? Now, yeah, he absolutely does.
Yeah.
What's the distance from kids on a bus? It's got to be absolutely 6 feet, and the kid's got to be wearing a mask on the bus, too. So what happens is now the fine points are being printed by the State Education Department and so on, but there's other things. Attendance has to be taken on these kids, whether it's through distance learning, remote learning, whatever they're doing, as well as in-class learning. Every kid has to be accounted for. They have to have a safety coordinator appointed. School districts have huge requirements in terms of record keeping now. Who got on the bus, who didn't?
Right.
Who did their lessons and who didn't in remote learning? What kids are not doing their reading lessons and what kids are? The record keeping for faculty, staff, administrators, and bus drivers and transportation department and cleaning staff, who cleaned what room and why? Because don't forget they got to do contact tracing. So if some kid ends up in room 107 with COVID-19, who cleaned that room last?
Yeah.
So this is big. This is very big.
And with the what I expect will be a reduction in funding just because the money doesn't exist. It just sounds like you're going to have to cut teachers to pay for people who clean and keep head counts.
Well, and on top of that, I think you're going to see a lot of teachers who are nearing retirement, if there is incentive out there, saying, I don't want any part of this.
Well, what you've got is, here's the thing I worried about right off the bat. This was in March and April when I was talking to superintendents and business officials. The big question is, how many of your bus drivers are coming back right off the bat to get them to school?
Right.
Because a lot of bus drivers, not all of them, obviously, some of them are senior citizens. They're doing this part-time, you know what I mean? Or they're monitors on the bus or something like that. And they may be comorbid, you know, they may have health issues or autoimmune issues.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, you know, this probably not be the best for them. You do have a lot of teachers who may be very, very, we don't say older teachers, we say experienced teachers, right? And so what happens is they may have health issues, but you could have anybody had health issues. For instance, you're not going to be running into a school bill after you've had this bout with cancer and so on.
Right.
So you've got a social distance. You've got to be particularly careful. So you've got all these people who've had all their health histories, and so you got cleaners. Same thing with the cleaners and so on. So what you've got is you've got a school community here made up of many various age groups and different health conditions. So the big problem now is, okay, say for instance we come up with a bus plan. Do we have enough bus drivers?
Right.
We have enough monitors. Don't forget, we still have special ed kids. We've got kids in wheelchairs. We've got kids who have all kinds of issues, who need supervision and things like this. So this is very difficult.
I almost feel like we're reaching a point where there's not enough time to be able to pull all of this off without doing it, starting out at the very least with distant learning. There's one school in the South I saw yesterday on the news that is that's doing 3 to 5 students a day.
Yeah.
Monday is and it spread it out through the entire week, and by the end of the week, this teacher has her entire class in, but it takes the whole week to do it.
But here's my question: so the other 4 days, what do they get? Do they get a distance lesson, or are they just there for one day? When does a teacher have time to do that?
They're supposed to be doing distance learning in New York. I don't know what they're doing in the South, but the South is a different animal when it comes to education, believe me. In New York State, for instance, you still have kids. There's Regents requirements to graduate from high school. Some kids are taking foreign languages. Think about the high school situation. We've all been in high school. It's one thing if you got your class in elementary school, you have, let's say, reading groups or whatever you're going to do, or learning pods and that type of thing. But all of a sudden, so the physics teacher's got to be able to get his physics class together at once, right? The French 4 teachers got to be able to get that French 4 class. That kid needs that credit, to compute their diploma requirements or something. So this is going to be completely difficult. And besides that, when you get into the higher levels, we'll say middle school and high school, you're going to have to count on, in many cases, self-discipline by all these kids to get on this distance learning thing in many ways and just simply make it work.
Going to be an interesting month, I have to say.
I think this is very difficult. I think we can all armchair quarterback. I think the first couple weeks of school are going to be a real learning experience, and expect mistakes and fumbles to be made here. And I think we'll do better as we go, but it's very, very difficult.
All right,
I remember as a teacher, all of a sudden some kid comes in and moves in from some other state. Now, what are we going to do with that?
Right.
Doc, we had one more person just call in and say, or wanted me to ask you what your take was on college students that are education majors that have student teaching requirements. Now in some cases, a lot of them have either graduated or they're needing that to advance their degree to become teachers, and that's got to be another cog in the wheel.
Absolutely. A lot of these people go student teaching. For instance, I had a whole bunch of student teachers when I was a master teacher, and, they need supervision too, but they would be a big help. And, if they're student teaching, they'd be free help. But then somebody has to supervise them as well.
Right.
So it becomes a real more difficult situation. I really expect we're going to have a real tough situation here in terms of just the social part of this whole thing, trying to keep everybody happy, so to speak, and make this work and keep everybody healthy. But also, there's going to be a cash register ringing here.
Yeah.
I mean, school districts are going to be eating up reserves if they have them to do this, because all this is generally unbudgeted.
Okay.
So they will be tapping into their rainy day funds because it really will be pouring.
Dr. Rick Timbs, SSFC, we appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
All right, you too.
Bye-bye.
It is, at the end of the day, it is very complicated, very difficult, and it's going to be I feel it's going to be quite a bumpy ride, getting this all taken care of.
And the finances is just...
It will be dealing with this for a long time. The financial end of this, we'll be dealing with it for a long time. 7:38 without a bailout. Maybe there's a bailout. Maybe there's some magical Maybe they'll allow
You know.
us, if they could just give us permission to print our own money. To me, that would change everything.